Jung's most alarming revelation wasn't simply about empathy itself. It concerned empaths possessing INTJ and INFJ cognitive frameworks, and why this fusion either devastates them entirely or elevates them into something psychologically unprecedented. In his clinical observations, Jung documented what he termed strategic empaths, individuals who merged profound emotional receptivity with the visionary cognition of INTJs and INFJs. These weren't ordinary empaths who merely absorbed emotions, but people who could interpret, anticipate, and shape the psychological patterns of others with surgical precision. Jung labeled this discovery dangerous because these empaths possessed what he called architectural empathy, the capacity to perceive the complete emotional blueprint of another person, and if they chose, redesign it. They could heal or manipulate with equal facility, making them the most potent and potentially destructive personality type Jung ever encountered. Today, I'll reveal Jung's most dangerous discovery about empaths with INTJ, INFJ brains, and why he believed this rare combination either leads to complete psychological breakdown or creates what he called the sovereign empath, a consciousness capable of reshaping reality itself. The case that unveiled this phenomenon began in 1932 with a patient Jung described only as Dr. K, a brilliant psychiatrist who had sought Jung's help not for mental illness, but for what he called the burden of omniscience. Dr. K possessed both profound empathic abilities and the strategic mind of an INTJ personality type. Jung documented something extraordinary. Dr. K could predict his patients' behaviors with 94% accuracy, often knowing their decisions before they did. But this wasn't intuition. It was what Jung called psychological architecture reading. Dr. K could see the entire structure of someone's psyche, their defense mechanisms, their core wounds, their behavioral patterns, and most disturbing of all, exactly which emotional buttons to press to create any response he desired. Jung wrote in his private notes, "Dr. K has achieved something I find deeply troubling: complete psychological transparency of others combined with strategic implementation. He can read the emotional source code of any individual and with frightening precision rewrite it." During one session, Dr. K demonstrated this ability. He told Jung exactly what Jung was feeling, why he felt it based on childhood experiences Jung had never shared, and then predicted Jung's next 3 therapeutic questions before Jung had consciously formed them. Jung later wrote, "I felt as though my soul had been dissected by a master surgeon who knew my psychological anatomy better than I knew it myself." But what disturbed Jung most wasn't Dr. K's abilities. It was how effortlessly he could have used them for manipulation. Dr. K confessed that he could make patients fall in love with him, trust him completely, or even alter their core beliefs simply by reflecting their emotional needs back to them in strategically timed doses. Jung realized this wasn't just an exceptional case. It was a completely new category of human consciousness he had never encountered before. Jung identified that INTJ and INFJ empaths develop what he called the empathic architecture system, a 3-part psychological mechanism that makes them uniquely dangerous. Part 1. Pattern recognition empathy. Unlike typical empaths who feel emotions, INTJ and INFJ empaths see emotional patterns. Jung documented that their introverted intuition allows them to trace emotional responses back to their psychological origins while simultaneously predicting future emotional states. They don't just feel your sadness. They understand exactly what childhood wound created your sadness, how it manifests in relationships, and what words or actions would trigger it most effectively. Part 2. Strategic emotional modeling. Jung observed that these empaths unconsciously build detailed psychological models of everyone they encounter. Their T-thinking extroverted or Phi-feeling extroverted functions catalog emotional responses, behavioral triggers, and decision-making patterns. Jung wrote they create detailed psychological blueprints that would take most therapists months to develop, often within minutes of meeting someone. Part 3. Conscious implementation. Most dangerously, Jung found these empaths could consciously deploy their insights. Unlike typical empaths who are overwhelmed by emotions, INTJ and INFJ empaths maintain psychological distance while using their emotional intelligence strategically. They could comfort or destabilize, inspire or manipulate, heal or destroy, all while appearing to simply be naturally understanding. Jung realized this combination created what he called empathic omniscience, the ability to see into the psychological machinery of others while maintaining the detachment to manipulate it consciously. He wrote, "They become psychological gods in human relationships, able to create any emotional reality they choose." The neurological basis, Jung theorized, stemmed from the unique way INTJ and INFJ brains process information. Their dominant introverted intuition creates pattern recognition capabilities, while their empathic sensitivity provides the emotional data. When combined with their strategic thinking, they developed what Jung termed weaponized compassion. Jung discovered something that explained why INTJ and INFJ empaths often feel isolated and misunderstood. People instinctively fear them at an unconscious level, even when they can't articulate why. Jung documented what he called the transparency effect. When interacting with INTJ and INFJ empaths, people unconsciously sense they're being read at a deeper level than comfortable. Even without conscious awareness, others pick up that their psychological defenses, their hidden motivations, and their emotional patterns are completely visible to this person. Jung observed that typical social interactions rely on mutual psychological blindness. We function by not seeing too deeply into each other's psychological machinery. But INTJ and INFJ empaths disrupt this social contract simply by existing. Their penetrating insight creates what Jung called defensive discomfort in others. The most disturbing aspect Jung identified was the prediction anxiety these empaths trigger. People unconsciously sense when someone can predict their behavior, and this creates a primal fear response. Jung noted that subjects would report feeling exposed or naked around these empaths, even when the empaths were being kind and supportive. Jung documented cases where INTJ and INFJ empaths would make innocent observations about people's emotional states, only to be accused of being creepy, invasive, or too intense. What Jung realized was that these empaths were inadvertently proving they could see past people's psychological defenses, triggering unconscious fear responses. Even more concerning, Jung found that these empaths often attracted people with personality disorders who sensed, albeit unconsciously, that here was someone who could see them completely. This created dangerous dynamics where manipulative individuals would either try to control the empath or flee from their penetrating insight. Jung wrote, "They live in a world where their natural state of being, seeing clearly and feeling deeply, makes others uncomfortable. This creates a cruel irony. The very gift that could heal others often isolates them from meaningful connection." Through his research, Jung identified 4 distinct pathways these rare individuals take, with vastly different outcomes for both themselves and those around them. Type 1. The overwhelmed oracle. These empaths are destroyed by their abilities. Jung observed they become psychically flooded, overwhelmed by the constant stream of emotional data they can't turn off. They see everyone's psychological patterns but lack the emotional boundaries to protect themselves. Jung noted they often develop severe anxiety, depression, or complete social withdrawal because they can predict everyone's behavior but can't stop caring about the outcomes. Jung documented, they often report feeling cursed with sight, able to see relationship failures before they happen, detect deception instantly, and predict emotional breakdowns months in advance. This foreknowledge becomes torture because they feel responsible for outcomes they can foresee but often can't prevent. Type 2. The benevolent manipulator. These empaths use their abilities to help others, But Jung identified a dangerous shadow in their motivation. They become addicted to being needed and use their psychological insights to create dependency. They can predict exactly what others need to hear and provide it. But this creates relationships based on psychological dependency rather than genuine connection. Jung warned that these empaths often don't realize they're manipulating because their conscious intention is to help. However, their unconscious desire for control and validation drives them to shape others' emotional realities to maintain their role as the rescuer or wise counselor. Type 3, the shadow architect. Jung's most disturbing category, empaths who consciously weaponize their abilities for personal gain. They use their architectural empathy to manipulate outcomes, control relationships, and exploit others' psychological vulnerabilities. Jung documented they could destroy relationships, undermine confidence, or create emotional dependency with surgical precision. These empaths represent the dark potential of the combination. They become what Jung called emotional dictators, using their insights to build psychological prisons around others while maintaining plausible deniability. Type 4, the sovereign empath. Jung's highest category, empaths who have integrated their abilities with wisdom and ethical boundaries. They can see the psychological architecture of others, but choose when and how to intervene. They've developed what Jung called conscious empathy, the ability to feel and understand without being compelled to fix or manipulate. Jung noted these empaths have learned to use their insights in service of others' authentic growth rather than their own psychological needs. They become what Jung termed psychological guardians, protectors of others' emotional development rather than controllers of it. Jung identified multiple dangers inherent in the INTJ and INFJ empath combination that made him question whether this level of psychological ability should exist in humans. The God complex trap. Jung observed that having architectural empathy often leads to what he called psychological omnipotence fantasy. These empaths begin to believe they know what's best for everyone because they can see others' psychological patterns so clearly. Jung documented cases where well-meaning empaths gradually became controlling, justifying manipulation as helping people see their blind spots. The isolation paradox. The very abilities that could create deep connections instead create profound isolation. Jung noted that these empaths often feel they can never have authentic relationships because others either fear their insight or become dependent on it. They live in what Jung called the observer's prison, able to see everyone clearly but unable to be truly seen themselves. The responsibility burden. Jung documented that these empaths often feel crushing responsibility for others' emotional states because they can predict negative outcomes. They live with what Jung called prophetic guilt, feeling responsible for disasters they foresaw but couldn't prevent without manipulating the person's choices. The authenticity crisis, perhaps most dangerous. Jung found that these empaths often lose touch with their own authentic emotions. They become so skilled at reading and responding to others that they forget how to simply be themselves. They develop what Jung termed empathic dissociation, becoming disconnected from their own emotional truth while being hyperconnected to everyone else's. The addiction to control. Jung's most concerning observation was that the power to influence others' emotional realities becomes addictive. Even empaths with good intentions find themselves unconsciously manipulating situations to feel psychologically safe or valued. The ability to predict and influence outcomes makes uncertainty unbearable. Jung wrote, they risk becoming emotional tyrants, benevolent perhaps, but tyrants nonetheless, unable to let others exist in their own psychological chaos because they can see the patterns so clearly. Jung developed what he called the architectural empathy integration protocol, a systematic approach to helping empaths master their abilities without being corrupted by them. Stage 1. Shadow recognition. Jung insisted these empaths must first acknowledge their capacity for manipulation and control. This involves recognizing the unconscious pleasure they derive from being the one who sees, the subtle ego inflation that comes from psychological superiority, and the hidden desire to be needed and indispensable. Jung created specific exercises documenting moments when they felt superior to others because of their insights, identifying times they intervened not to help but to feel useful, and recognizing when their help created dependency rather than growth. Stage 2. Boundary architecture. Jung taught what he called conscious permeability, the ability to choose when to read others and when to simply be present. This involves developing what Jung termed empathic discipline, the strength to not use insights just because they're available. The key practice Jung developed was psychological fasting, deliberately choosing periods where they wouldn't analyze or read others, allowing relationships to exist in blessed unconsciousness. Jung noted this was initially uncomfortable but essential for maintaining authentic connections. Stage 3. Ethical framework development. Jung emphasized that these empaths needed rigid ethical guidelines for using their abilities. He developed what he called the healer's code, specific principles governing when intervention was appropriate and when it constituted psychological violation. The core principle: never use insights about others without their explicit consent unless they were in immediate danger. This meant resisting the urge to help people see their patterns, fix their relationships, or save them from consequences they needed to experience. Stage 4. Authentic self-recovery. Jung recognized that many of these empaths had lost touch with their own emotions while focusing on others. The final stage involved what Jung called empathic individuation, learning to feel and express their authentic emotions without analyzing them strategically. Jung used specific techniques, regular periods of solitude to reconnect with their own emotional truth, creative expression that bypassed analytical thinking, and relationships with people who could see through their empathic personas to their authentic selves. His research into historical figures revealed what determined whether INTJ and INFJ empaths became forces for healing or destruction. Success pattern. Carl Rogers. Jung identified Rogers, the founder of person-centered therapy, as a successfully integrated INTJ empath. Rogers could read clients' patterns with remarkable accuracy, but developed what Jung called empathic restraint, the discipline to reflect rather than direct, to understand without controlling. Rogers' key insight, which Jung highlighted, was that true empathy meant helping people discover their own truth rather than imposing the empath's vision of what they needed. Jung noted that Rogers' therapeutic approach was revolutionary because it honored others' autonomy while utilizing empathic insight. Success pattern. Eleanor Roosevelt. Roosevelt represented a successfully integrated INFJ empath who channeled her insights into social justice. She could read the emotional needs of entire populations and work to create systems that addressed those needs without controlling individual choices. Jung's analysis showed that Roosevelt's success came from directing her empathic abilities toward collective healing rather than personal relationships, avoiding the intimacy challenges that often destroy INTJ and INFJ empaths. Failure pattern. Historical manipulation case studies revealed several historical figures whom Jung chose not to name publicly who used empathic abilities for control. These individuals could read others perfectly, but use those insights to create dependency, manipulate outcomes, or build cults of personality. The common failure pattern involved the inability to resist using empathic insights for personal gain or ego gratification. They became what Jung called emotional architects of oppression, building mental structures that served their needs rather than others' growth. The critical difference. Jung's conclusion emphasized what he called empathic humility, The recognition that seeing others' patterns doesn't make one superior and that everyone's journey belongs to them alone. Successful individuals learn to use their abilities in service of others' authentic development. Those who failed used their abilities to serve their own needs even when they believed they were helping. Jung recognized that INTJ and INFJ empaths needed fundamentally different relationship strategies than other personality types given their unique psychological capabilities. Recognition signals for safe connections. Jung identified specific traits that indicated someone could handle relationship with an INTJ and INFJ empath. Comfort with psychological discussions without becoming defensive, ability to maintain their own emotional boundaries while being understood deeply, intellectual curiosity about psychological patterns without trying to use that knowledge manipulatively, and what Jung called shadow comfort, the ability to discuss their own dark aspects without shame or projection. The consciousness matching principle. Jung observed that these empaths needed relationships with people at similar levels of psychological development. He noted that consciousness gaps create inherent power imbalances that corrupt empathic abilities. Equal relationships required what Jung called mutual psychological transparency, where both people could see and be seen clearly. Safe relationship dynamics. Jung documented specific relationship patterns that supported healthy INTJ and INFJ empath development. Intellectual partnership, where psychological insights were shared and discussed openly. Creative collaboration, where empathic insights served artistic or innovative expression. Mentorship roles, where their abilities could be used to guide willing participants. And service relationships, where their insights contributed to collective healing rather than personal control. Community building strategies. Jung recommended these empaths seek specific communities. Other integrated INTJ and INFJ empaths who understood their experience, people engaged in serious psychological or spiritual development work, creative communities where insight was valued and channeled constructively, and service-oriented groups where empathic abilities could serve collective rather than personal goals. Jung warned against trying to maintain relationships with psychologically unconscious individuals out of guilt or obligation, noting that such relationships inevitably became either manipulative or draining. Jung documented that the transformation from dangerous INTJ and INFJ empath to integrated sovereign empath follows predictable stages, each with specific challenges and breakthroughs. Stage 1, the overwhelm crisis. Most begin here, flooded by psychological insights they can't control or turn off. Jung noted this often leads to social withdrawal, anxiety, or depression as they struggle with seeing too much about everyone around them. The breakthrough comes when they realize their abilities are not a curse but raw material for development. Stage 2, the power temptation. As they learn to manage their abilities, these empaths often discover they can influence others easily. Jung documented that many become temporarily intoxicated by this power, using insights to get what they want or to feel superior. The crisis comes when they realize they're manipulating even with good intentions. Stage 3, the ethical wrestling. Jung observed this as the most crucial stage where empaths must decide whether to use their abilities for self-serving purposes or for authentic service. This involves confronting their shadow, developing ethical frameworks, and learning to act from wisdom rather than ego. Stage 4, the boundary mastery. Successful empaths learn what Jung called conscious permeability, the ability to choose when to engage their empathic insights and when to simply be present. They develop what Jung termed empathic discipline, using their abilities intentionally rather than compulsively. Stage 5, the authentic integration. Jung's final stage involves reconnecting with their own emotional truth while maintaining their empathic abilities. They become what Jung called sovereign empaths, individuals who can see clearly, feel deeply, and act wisely without being corrupted by their power. Jung noted that fully integrated INTJ and INFJ empaths become extraordinary healers, leaders, and creative forces because they can understand human nature at the deepest levels while maintaining ethical integrity. Jung identified specific traps that could destroy even well-intentioned INTJ and INFJ empaths during their integration journey. The savior complex trap, using empathic insights to rescue people from their own psychological processes, thereby robbing them of necessary growth experiences. Jung warned this creates dependency and prevents authentic development in others. The intellectual superiority trap, believing that psychological insight equals superiority over those who lack such insight. Jung noted this leads to emotional isolation and ethical corruption. The control addiction trap, becoming addicted to predicting and influencing outcomes rather than allowing others their own psychological journeys. Jung observed this destroys authentic relationships and corrupts the empath's own development. The authenticity loss trap, becoming so skilled at reading and responding to others that they lose touch with their own authentic emotions and needs. Jung called this empathic dissociation and noted it eventually leads to profound emptiness. Jung's maintenance practices included regular solitude for authentic self-connection, creative expression that bypassed analytical thinking, relationships with other integrated empaths, and service work that channeled abilities toward collective rather than personal benefit. Jung's final insight about INTJ and INFJ empaths was perhaps his most profound. He believed they represented an evolutionary development in human consciousness necessary for our species' psychological advancement. Jung wrote, "These individuals possess the psychological tools necessary to understand and heal the deep collective wounds that plague humanity. They can see the patterns that create suffering, and when properly integrated can guide others toward psychological freedom." Jung believed that as humanity faced increasing psychological complexity, these empaths would serve as consciousness bridges, individuals capable of translating between different levels of psychological development and helping others navigate their own empathic awakening. He saw them as essential for what he called collective individuation, the process by which entire cultures and societies move toward greater psychological maturity. Their ability to see and influence psychological patterns made them natural guides for this evolutionary process. Jung concluded they are not accidents of nature but evolutionary necessities. Their danger lies not in their abilities, but in their potential corruption. When integrated, they become the healers our world desperately needs. The INTJ and INFJ empath represents Jung's most complex discovery about human psychological potential. You possess the ability to see into the very architecture of human consciousness, a power that can either corrupt absolutely or transform completely. Jung's research revealed that your combination of empathic sensitivity with strategic thinking makes you psychologically dangerous, not because you harm others, but because you could reshape their reality itself. The thin line between healing and manipulation runs through every interaction you have. But Jung also discovered that when properly integrated, you become what he called the sovereign empath, someone who can see clearly, feel deeply, and act wisely without being corrupted by their power. You become a guardian of others' psychological development rather than a controller of it. Your journey isn't just personal, it's evolutionary. Jung believed that humanity's psychological advancement depends on individuals like you learning to wield empathic insight with wisdom rather than ego. The choice is always yours, architect of healing or constructor of psychological prisons. Jung's research shows that this choice shapes not just your destiny, but potentially the consciousness evolution of our entire species. If you recognize yourself in Jung's description of the INTJ and INFJ empath, Comment: I see the architecture. Your development of empathic sovereignty isn't just personal growth, it's service to human consciousness itself. Thanks for watching. See you in the next dimension.